Oh my goodness, I have had the pleasure of being here for the full day, and it has been so amazing and generative, and I've written so much, and it reminds me because I get so overwhelmed by all of the things all the time, and there's things that are happening, and I'm like, I don't want to go to that, or like I'm just not going to do that. That we should go to things. It's actually really cool, and really important, I think, to listen to each other's stories and see what's out there and get new ideas. So I want to thank everybody for their presentations, their work, their bravery to be able to come out and present and get feedback, and to think with each other, and also just to be here on a Friday, just hanging out and being together. I also really hope that this has caffeine in it, this iced tea. And I always tell people, like, I'm drinking my caffeine now, so in about like 15 minutes you're gonna see a totally different person. It'll kick in. But I just want to say I'm happy to be here on Tonga lands, in this space, this very like generative space that is the Los Angeles area basin. And I'm reminded of work I got to do as a graduate student with one of my mentors, Dr. Mashana Goman, who brought me out here to remind me that like these urbanized spaces are indigenous spaces, and that they hold indigenous memory of place. And so whenever I come into these spaces, these cities, because I live in a very small, like rural area in my home area, I'm very fortunate to be able to live and work from home. I am always reminded of what I call like my random acts of indigenousness that exist all around me, and I like to take pictures of like random acts of indigenousness. Just whether or not I see like a girl walking down the street wearing a ribbon skirt, and I'm like, random acts of indigenousness. Because I just think it's so important to remind ourselves that like these are all of our spaces, and they're so embodied in landscape. Like the mountains, the hills, like everything had a name. And the thing that happens to me as a Hoopa person sometimes when I come into these areas is I can get very overwhelmed by the sheer size of it and like the constant busyness and the noise. And I remind myself to really think about this space as trying to tell me a story, like a story that it wants me to remember as I'm sort of like moving through this world. And I like to talk to my students a lot because so many of our students at Humboldt actually come from the Los Angeles area. They actually come from this region, and they come up to Humboldt because they say it's the most northern place they can go to without leaving the state but get away from their parents. And so I'm like, well, welcome to this like entirely different part of this place, right? An entirely new space for you. And we talk about getting to know that place and then bringing that place with you as you come home. The only thing that continues to make me very, like, I get not sad but reflective when I come here is what they did to the LA River. And I start to like really think about how I reimagine this place as a place of like rivers and waters, and not a place of pavement and concrete. And we had this really good conversation in my decolonizing methodologies class that I'm teaching this semester about sort of the obsession of settler colonialism with concrete and the way that they've used concrete to shape landscape, and how concrete becomes this like this way that they think they can kind of control everything. But what I love about our more than human relatives, the nature around us, is they're like, oh, you think you can control us with concrete? And then they start like tearing apart the concrete like piece by piece, whether that be through how they like root themselves or what they push through. And I think about that in terms of where settler colonialism always thinks that it's found a thing that's gonna stop us from rebuilding the world the way that it should be. And it's never the thing that can actually do that. Because so much of what needs to be in this world is going to come into being by sheer force of the fact that that's the way it's supposed to be. And if we stop trying to think of like the concrete is permanent, the structure is permanent, settler colonialism is permanent, you start to see just how precarious settler colonialism is. I'm using a key word that I learned that we were talking about just now. I actually think the most precarious thing that we experience in life is settler colonialism. It is the most precarious thing that we have to navigate because it is in and of itself always on its way out. I always talk about like when the first Indigenous peoples had to come to the table to negotiate treaties and the existence of this new country, this what they called at the time, what many Indigenous peoples called a fledgling United States. It didn't come into being in like this really positive, they're like, ooh, you guys have a lot of work to do to be able to make this work, and you're not willing to do it. So they were looking around going, oh, you're like temporary. You're on your way out. The minute you built yourself as an empire, your empire was crumbling. Because you cannot build empire and not have it just be working itself out of existence. So we might be talking about like, when is the end of empire? And I always say, I think Indigenous peoples were like, I mean, it started in 1776, it started 1492. It started the day that they didn't ask the right questions or approach it in the right way. It started to take itself apart because it is not sustainable in the way that it was put together. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of people that are coming in being like, this doesn't feel right. And I think what's beautiful about Indigenous studies is we get to come in and be like, it doesn't feel right. And there's something really cool that we could be doing. And so what I tell people is that as an Indigenous studies person, I feel like my job is to come in and be like, hey, did you know you're in a box? And you're like, what? I'm like, oh, they built this box around you. They called it settler colonialism. They made you think this is the only way the world works and looks and functions and is structured. And every day you walk around and you're like, well, this is just the way that it is. It's just the way it always has to be. And you don't notice that it's constantly being reinforced through absolutely everything that exists in the world to sort of tell you, this is the box. This is just how the box is. And you're sitting in your box being like, this must just be it. And I said, that's why Indigenous peoples are such a threat to the state, because we know the world before the box. And we can tell you what it smells like and what it tastes like and what it feels like because we lived it. And we have stories about it, and we can show you that there is a functional world that is not this box. And in fact, it's probably better. And so we come in with Indigenous studies and we go, hey, you want to know what's outside the box? It's pretty cool. And then we start telling you, like, this is what it could be. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then you leave this talk, your class, the book you read, and you're walking around being like, I'm in a box. I hate it here. This box is so hard. I hate this box. And then you see it everywhere. It's what makes me really fun to go to the movies with. Because I'll watch a movie, and then I'll go, so that's a movie about how capitalism is the only thing that's going to save us, and what we really need is the authority of capitalism to make sure that we don't fall off the edge. And then my husband will be like, that's Captain America. And I'm like, yeah, it's supposed to tell you that somehow we got to stay in this box, right? Now the other beautiful thing about Indigenous studies is we can come in after that and you're just thinking I hate this box, I hate it. And then we go, oh, okay, cool. Did you know the box is made of duct tape and string? Did you know the box is falling apart? It's really not very strong. You know how we know that? They banned books. If they thought the thing was really cool, they wouldn't care what we wrote about or thought about or what we talked about, what we sang about. They would be like, you guys can do whatever you want. The box is going to maintain itself, but they know that the box is barely hanging on, and it's just waiting for all of us to start being like, ooh, what's this one? Ooh, what's this one? So we can just take it apart and move on. And that's the thing that's about to always become, is us being able to say, F this box, right? So that is me saying, I've been trying to do this work lately of how we help to understand the times that we find ourselves in as people who start to rethink time itself and what it actually looks like. And I love that people come to me and they're like, what do you have to say about this moment that we find ourselves in? And I always begin with, welcome to the most precedented of times. If you think about it, it's just exactly what's supposed to be happening. And in fact, it's all been set up in this sort of very cyclical story of what it means for people to finally remember who they really are. And who they really are is a part of the whole world around them. And for people to be forcibly made to grow up. Because my great uncle, Awak Dave Risling, he's somebody that really inspired me to go into academia. In fact, when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, he sent me a card in the mail, and it said congratulations on the outside, and then I opened it up. On the inside, all he wrote was, when are you going to graduate school? And I was like, Uncle, I just got done. Like, I'm done. He goes, mm-hmm. And then he would like talk to me and be like, when are you going to graduate school? And it wasn't until later, like after he had passed away, that I was like, I guess I'll go to graduate school now. And I went to the program that he started, which was the UC Davis Native American Studies program. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try this. And it was a difficult decision because I didn't know about leaving my community to go do this work in academia. And I felt very weird about going into a place that uses words like discipline. I was like, oh, they're going to discipline me into my discipline. And I was like, this is weird. And trying to like figure out how this whole thing works and what's going on, it was really interesting for me because I wasn't invested in making sure that the institution was going to be okay or that we were like elevating the institution. I was invested in what we were going to do in our communities. And it was constantly coming to the table to be like, well, I'm really invested in like what we're going to do with this policy to make sure that this thing happens for this like random thing that you're trying to put together. I'm not invested in Robert's Rules of Order. Like, I need to think about my communities. And so I started thinking about the work that Indigenous Studies has done. And I love talking to my friends, and they're like, you know, we're not a discipline. We're not people that like, we wouldn't even describe ourselves as like interdisciplinary scholars. We would describe ourselves as undisciplined scholars. And I was like, you're right. To be undisciplined in the academy is so important because it's like these words that are trying to constantly push you into like your place. Again, a box. And I've been thinking about that a lot because I'm working on my second book. And so this is supposed to be like I'm working on a book, you guys. You can all hold me accountable to that. It was supposed to be finished at the end of February. It is not. But you know, things take as long as they take. And I've been working on it a lot to think about how I want to talk about the work that we're doing with our environment, our culture, our communities of our more than human relatives. And really nodding toward an Indigenous ecofeminist ethic, but really very specific to like Hupa Yura Karuk, Wiat Talawa, like feminist ethics of how we engage with our environment. And part of this came out of the work I'm doing right now with the Food Sovereignty Lab, which I'll show you a video about at the very end and tell you a little bit more about. But a lot of it came out of me realizing that I've been working on what it means to be an Indigenous ecofeminist since I was born, since I was a very little girl. So in California, we're acorn people. And when I would introduce myself to you in my languages, I would often say, I'd say, hey, Ankile, Dr. Cutcha, Risling, Baldy, Ahoyet, Kunya, Yan, Aute, Kina, Aute, Kuzni, Aute, Naktinahwe, Aute. So I would tell you, I'm Cutcha, I'm Hupa Yurk and Karuk. You notice I didn't say any of those words, because that's not our names for ourselves. In Hupa, we call ourselves Naktinahwe. That means people of the valley. How I say people of, not people from, people of the valley. We call our place Natanuf, which means the place where all trails return. I asked my grandpa, who was a Hupa speaker and he would teach me Hupa sometimes, I said, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean, the place where all trails return? He goes, you know, like the center of the universe. I mean, but Hupa people, that's like exactly how we would describe where we're from. And I was like, well, that's real Hupa of us. To be like, this is the center of the universe. And then he looked at me and goes, how do you know it's not? He was always asking me to rethink my place in the world, especially through language. He was always asking me to rethink why I had assumptions about how the world worked. And he would be like, you think like this, but you gotta understand this from the world. And I took that to heart as I got older, because I kept thinking about how one of the ways we introduce ourselves is we say, Kunya Aute. And what that means is, I'm a human being. I'm a person. So we say, when we introduce ourselves, we'll tell you, I'm a human being. I'm just like you, I'm a human being. But what it actually means is, I'm an acorn eater. Because we said, if you want to be a human being, you have to eat acorns. That's what makes you a human being. And I love that for California Native peoples for a couple of really key reasons. And I really think about it as a framework of ecofeminism as acorn eaters, as acorn peoples. It tells you about how you should see the world. Acorns are different across landscapes. They also exist everywhere. They exist all over the world. A lot of peoples are acorn eaters, right? In fact, in Europe, prior to feudalism, they were acorn eaters. They ate acorns. And part of this becomes like a separation of class systems between who eats acorns, which are readily available and free to you, and who eats wheat, which you have to like enslave people to put together at the time, right? Like the kings are like, see, that's what makes this important. It takes a lot to get wheat to the table. It doesn't take as much to get acorns to the table. So they separated, but they were acorn eaters. Acorn eaters are everywhere. We have differences from each other. There are different acorns all over California. They taste different from each other. They work a little bit different from each other. Of course, I'm from Hoopa, so I will tell you, we say that tan oak acorns, which are the ones we eat the most, are the best acorns. But if you ask my friends who are from San Diego, they always go, no. They're like, it's black oak. And I was like, so we, we have differences of opinion about we are different, but we are the same. We are all acorn peoples. We're supposed to learn how to live here together. Acorns also take care of you. They are a reminder that in this world, people care about you. It takes about a year from picking up an acorn to actually eating it. That means if someone feeds you acorns, they really, really love you. They love you so much, they're willing to spend a year of their lives to feed you. That shows you that you're an important part of a community. You cannot think, who am I? Do I really belong here? Does anybody really care about me? When then someone is willing to feed you something that took them a year to put to that table. Acorns also tell you about the world around you, how they behave, what they're experiencing. Will tell you about what's about to happen in the climate. Will tell you about what's about to happen over the next year. Acorns are the peoples that taught us that we should always have enough. Because the world can provide for you. You don't need to grow monocultural crops in a row that destroy the soil and the environment around you. You can have acorns that are everywhere for you, and everybody can eat and everybody can do well. And so I love acorns for this reason. I talk about acorns, I teach our young people about acorns, I try to reconnect our people to acorns. At the events that we do, we try to feed young people acorns. We always tell them this disconnect that we have from our acorns was designed by colonialism. At one point, acorns were targeted for eradication. We were arrested if we went to gather them. We were told that they were not good for you. There was a point in period of time where you could have your children taken away from you because you were feeding them acorns, which was supposed to be bad for them. These are all things that we internalize. The boarding schools come in and they're like, not acorns. Acorns are bad. The missionaries in Southern California said, not acorns. So I was like, so this work that we've done to make sure we still know how to do acorns and build acorns and eat acorns and feed you acorns is so important to understanding how we have resisted and navigated colonialism and how we have made sure that we have that knowledge carrying forward. That's why eating these acorns is so important. And then the young people are like, okay, and they're invested. And so then they'll sometimes, especially if they've never had it, they'll go like, well, what do acorns taste like? And I'll say, acorns taste like acorns. The beautiful thing about our foods is like while we are now used to, as a culture, as a group of people, we are mostly used to eating like artificial flavorings. We don't really quite know what food tastes like. And so when you taste a food that tastes like itself, it can be like a little jarring. It can be a little bit like, wait, what? Huh? Like, what is this? Because it just tastes like what it is. An acorn tastes like an acorn. It's really good because it's good for you. It also takes up the flavor of whatever you put in it. So you put fish in it, it tastes really good. You put berries in it, it tastes really good. I always say to them, it doesn't taste like hot Cheetos because nothing tastes like hot Cheetos. Do you think about the way that we sort of like understand this understanding of the world? That's what I'm exploring. Because I really see this reconnection as so important to who we are as Indigenous peoples. So I'm talking, so I'm writing my new book. I have it like all outlined. I got all these chapters put together. Everything's like a mess. But it was funny because I keep writing new things. So I would say, when I started talking about the book and I had to sell it to an editor, and also frankly to myself, I said, it's like, what if Robin Wall Kimmerer was pissed off? That's what I'm writing. And I was like, I thought about it and I think, maybe Robin Wall Kimmerer is also a little pissed off. She's just really good at weaving words into poetry and critical discussion into story, so that we're lured into her environmental justice through joy and understanding. And I'm less of that and more like, what the fuck are we gonna do now? Because the plants love you, because they know you, and they have been living with and observing and relating with us since the beginning of time, but they also might hate you a little bit. And they also might think you deserve a flick to the head sometimes. Have you ever been smacked in the head with a branch? I have. I want people to think about this idea of what it means to build an Indigenous ecofeminist ethic. I don't know what that is yet. I'm exploring it. I'm talking about it. But I have all these chapters that I'm exploring, and so I always tell the students, this is how you make it possible, make it happen. You just start talking about it as if it's real, right? So far, I've got an introduction because you got to have one of those. Because I'm publishing with an academic press, right? So I still can't get out of the academic discussion. I'll get there someday. Which I tell my community, don't worry, it just means I have to use words like epistemology a lot. And they're on board. I've had 8th and 7th graders back on my reservation that read my book, and then they come back and they're like, I couldn't get the whole thing, but I got most of it. And I said, probably the most important things. And they're like, yes, but they keep trying. And I love that. I love that they get to read these stories. So we have an introduction. I'm going to do a chapter on what I call Acorn Futures, which we just talked about, California Indian Studies for Decolonial Futures. I'm doing a chapter called Settler Sense and Sensibilities. And this is about land back. And it actually is subtitled, Fuck Land Trusts. How to give all the land back to the indigenous people. I'm coming for land trusts. Not indigenous land trusts, I mean land trusts. Next one is Fire Futures. Indigenous women are going to have to save the world again, aren't we? Salmon Futures, that's one subtitle, Fuck Fish Farms. Settler Science and Decolonial Restoration. We had a really big fish farm discussion in our region with a group that wanted to come in and build a salmon fish farm where they were going to grow salmon in a concrete tube, for commercial purposes, because we have a salmon restoration thing that we're going through right now. We don't have as many salmon as we're supposed to, and they're really trying to sell fish farms to us. And I'm like, fish farms, fish farms. And I was like, okay, what happens? And they're like, oh, we grow salmon in a concrete tube. And then they never see the light of day, and then we farm them, and then we put them out there into the commercial industry, and then you guys don't have to worry about salmon anymore. You got enough salmon. And I was like, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, well, so what happens if they get out? Because they're not the same kind of salmon that are from our area. I was like, what if they get out? Oh, don't worry about that. They'll never get out. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, well, what happens if they try to breed? And they said, oh no, they can't breed. Because we make them all the same sex, and so they'll never breed with each other. So they can't get out of control. And then I was like, I never thought I'd be the Jeff Goldblum in this situation. But did nobody see Jurassic Park? So I was like, good luck. So at one point I actually went to a talk and I talked about fish farms, and afterwards the people came up to me and they're like, look, if you can't solve the fish problem with fish farms, how would you solve the fish problem? You got to solve the problem. And I said, I can solve the fish problem tomorrow. Take down all the dams. Why are you doing the work to do that instead of finding new, weird little ways to grow fish in concrete tubes? I was like, that's the thing about settler science. It gets in a room together and it's concrete tube salmon. I was like, your imagination is limited by the box. And the problem is none of you have been ever asked to think outside of this box. And so you come back and you're like, oh no, we're doing concrete tube salmon. And someone's like, that's depressing. And then they're like, no, you gotta understand. And I always tell scientists, one, they actually bring me to their conferences a lot, and they give me 45 minutes to basically tell them that I don't think that what they're doing is very smart. And then afterwards they come up and they're like, that was really funny. And then I'm always like, I don't think I'm trying to be funny, I think I'm just saying true stuff. And then they're like, well, it was hilarious, you should take it on the road. I told them to pay me. So I was like, I'll come and make fun of you again, pay me money. But I will tell you, the thing I learned from my uncle was he used to bring scientists into our communities a lot, and he would do work with them. And at one point when I was a kid, I was sitting with him and I was like, why do you do this? These people, they come in here, they get all this information, they write it down, they never come back. They don't give us anything, they've never built anything here, they've never done anything, why do you do this? And he said, Cutcha, Western science is like toddlers. He's like, they haven't been here that long. They don't really know anything. He's like, they're learning it. That's why they're always discovering stuff that we already know. Because they're like little kids. He's like, and that's why when they discover things, our job is to be like, good job. Because we already know. He's like, because we're the elders here. And I was all, oh. He's like, so you can't take them so seriously. He's like, that's why they're always saying things like, did you know sage cleans the air? And then he's like, in your jobs, but oh yes, you should do a scientific experiment to show people that sage cleans. Because he's like, they're like toddlers, they're trying to figure it out. He's like, we have a knowledge of this place that is at least 10,000 years old, but he's like, since the beginning of time. Do you know how many scientific experiments that is? Do you know how much data that is? Do you know who has the most data, long-term data sets of how the world is supposed to work? Indigenous people. He's like, that's why we don't start from point zero. And so he's like, you gotta remind them of that. So he's like, so I don't work with them because I think they're so smart. He's like, I work with them because somebody's gotta help them. And I was like, okay. Now, I'm also reading a chapter that I like to call Oceans 111. And it's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act Liberation Praxis, and maybe we should just rob the UC Berkeley Museum. They're not going to invite me there anymore. But my whole favorite thing was I was like, no, I literally have gone to visit so I can figure out how we robbed the Berkeley Museum. It's not that hard, by the way. But my thing being like, maybe we're at that point in colonialism, right? I'm also doing a chapter with medicine women where we're going to talk about like their praxis and their understanding of ecofeminism. And then I get to do a chapter with a medicine woman that I work very closely with that we're calling Plant Conspirators. Indigenous resistance in the most precedented of times. This actually came out of a conversation we had where I was talking to her about how disappointed I was that they were outlawing abortion again in various places. I was like, I'm so over it. I'm over it. And she said, well, you know, Kutcha, plants will conspire with you against colonialism. And I was like, what? She's like, they have always been our co-conspirators. And she starts talking about how many things we have that can address all of these issues of how colonialism tries to control us. She's like, the plants have been conspiring with us against colonialism since the very start. And so we're writing a chapter about that together. And then I have to do a conclusion, and in the conclusion, that one's subtitled, Fuck Artificial Intelligence. So we'll see how it goes. I wanted to give people resources, so I'm going to have a lot of resources that are available that I'm not even going to talk about to you, but I'm going to tell you that they exist. The first is sometimes people ask me about land acknowledgements. I actually have a talk I give called What Good is a Land Acknowledgement? It's up on YouTube. You can listen to it, pass it on if you want to. I think land acknowledgements are only good if you're willing to like do something about it. So when I give talks where people are like, hey, can you come give a land acknowledgement? I'm always like, yeah, sure, my land acknowledgement is 20 minutes. And then they're always like, what? And I was like, yeah, it takes 20 minutes to do my land acknowledgement. At one point I had a group that was like, is there anything we can do to help you make your land acknowledgement shorter? And I said, yeah, you can give all the land back and then I won't have to show up and tell you whose land you're on. You'll already know. At one point they were like, can you come do a land acknowledgement? And I was like, you do it. Like, you should do it. And they were like, well, we'd like to, have you come do it because you're so good at it. And they said, how much would it you'd like to be paid? And I said, $155,000. And they were like, what? And I said, that's how much money it takes to buy a very small little piece of land that's connected to my reservation. So you want me to come do your land acknowledgement, you will give me $155,000 so that I can start buying land back. It's going to happen. I swear. In the talk, I actually talk about how, unless you're going to do something, don't do a land acknowledgement. And that has to mean you're committing to doing something. You have to be committed to land back. If you're not committed to land back, don't do a land acknowledgement. We don't need you to acknowledge you're on our lands. We need you to do something about it. And then I talk about how there was this instance where I went to a university and I was really, I was annoyed that day. And so I stood up and I was like, normally they'd have me do a land acknowledgement. I don't feel like it. So what I'm going to do instead is put up this QR code where you can donate to an Indigenous Women's Land Trust in this region. And you're all going to do it right now. And then I just stood there. And I was like, I'll wait. And then they were looking at me and I was like, take out your phones and start paying money. And then they were like, what? And they took them out. I was like, go ahead, you can do it. And then they did it. And actually the woman who runs the land trust later texted me and she was like, I was wondering what that was about. We have to do something, right? Together. We also wrote a land back report in California if you'd like to see that, based on our land back symposium, which you can see all the panels at if you want to at this website. So a way of which engaging with how land back works in California. I love doing land back work. It's one of my favorite things to work on. It sometimes makes me the person that when you sort of like come into a space, people get really like afraid. Because I come in and I'm like, you should give all the land back. And then I just go, okay, thanks, bye. I don't think it needs much more than that. Actually, at one point, someone was like, there was like a meme where they were like, what's a talk you could give if you had to give like a 20-minute TED talk without any notice? And I was like, I don't know, I think I'd stand up and say, hey, you guys should give all the land back. And then I'd be like, I got 19 minutes to wait. The end. I think what's really important to understand is I really tie this to like how we understand what land management, resource management, and also what the future of like resource sort of protection actually looks like. I think it comes from land back first. Actually, I think the first step is land back. Everybody always thinks that land back is sort of like the last step after you've done all the things and you can like, okay, we've done all the things, now we can give the land back. I'm always like, you should give it back first. It actually should be the first thing you're thinking about doing. And we have a great example of this at Humboldt because there was a group that got together of scientists that were going to do coastal restoration for sea level rise. And they listened to a bunch of the talks that we had all been going through around land back, and they were like, you know, instead of buying this property through the state of California for Cal Poly Humboldt, why don't we buy it for the Wiyot tribe and then just partner with them to work on this restoration for sea level rise and at the same time give them land back. So when we did the grant proposal, the state of California was like, wait, what? And then they were like, that's really cool. And then they were, okay, cool, we can make that work, and now we did that. Part of it just came from, why wouldn't we just do it that way? I always say, like, why wouldn't you just do it that way? Why does it have to belong to the university? It shouldn't actually belong to the university. The university is fine. They don't need any more land. In fact, they're always complaining about how they don't have enough money for the land they already have. So like, they're always like, we don't have enough money. I was like, what are you doing then? So how do we help Indigenous peoples be at the forefront of that? I also think a lot about my family in this because I grew up in a region where we are peoples who, they call us like relatively uncontacted until about 1849 with the gold rush. And so one of the things that means is like many of our peoples are still in their Aboriginal territories. We've never been removed. We never stopped our ceremonies, like our world renewal ceremonies. We've always been doing these things since the beginning of time. We're in a little bit different of a situation than many Indigenous nations who are removed from their territories. Instead, we are where we came into being. And what that means is we also have a really clear idea of the connection between what we call like the before time and what happened through invasion, and then what happens through our restoration of the things that we're trying to bring back, even though we are still dealing with colonialism. And my great-grandfather, he actually wrote a lot when he was alive, and he wrote all these papers about like what it was like to be a person who had grown up with people that had lived through the gold rush, where he was born at the tail end of it, where he went to boarding school, and he really wanted to make sure that there was some kind of story, some kind of archive that existed that we could pull from. And when he passed, he left his papers to his daughter, and she would let me go through them a lot, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, this is so important. And she would say, someday you can write about him, someday you can quote him and write about him. She's like, but you have to wait until I pass away because he was my dad, and I will have opinions. And I was like, okay. But one thing that he talks about is the ways in which history and these stories are completely left out of the archive and erased. And sometimes where you're going to find them are from the stories that come from your family, your people. And sometimes they're housed in like your grandma's garage or like someplace that you would never even expect. To think that the archive is complete in some way, as if this is the only stories to be told, is the fallacy of research, where most of the archive, especially with Indigenous peoples, exists within our families and spaces. And that this is where we're going to start pulling from. Now, one thing he writes in his papers that I think is so important is he says, I have learned through my life that we were highly civilized, that of which will never be equal. The civilization that is patterned from the materials that kills human lives is poorly civilized. And I love this because he was always this person to us. He was always asking us to rethink how we saw the world. And so he would tell us, he would be like, who's primitive? The people that get all their brightest minds together so they can create the biggest bomb to kill the most people? Or the people that get all of their people together so that they can create a world where everybody can breathe and drink the water? where everybody has a house and the food that they need to eat. He's like, who's primitive? And I think it's a really important thing for me to remind myself of, because as I think about land and space, I also think about how little we know about indigenous thought and theory and engagement and methodology for what the world could be and look like. This is actually an imaginative exercise, and I will talk a little bit about imagination, but this is an imaginative exercise that was done by a historian where he wanted to create a map that would show you exactly what a satellite image would have looked like of California circa about 1851, and then he shows you the map as it actually looked in 2013. And then it asks you to rethink even what you think about what is this land, what is this landscape, and what has colonialism done? And how has it resulted in spaces where it's hard for us to reimagine, because could we imagine that there's supposed to be a giant lake in the middle of Central California? There's supposed to be water and greenery everywhere. There's supposed to be these things that help us to create the world. There's supposed to be large groves of oak trees. There's supposed to be spaces where people can get respite. There's supposed to be a river in Los Angeles. And then rethink how we understand what land actually looks like. Now, I think where I draw from a lot is Dr. Jessica Hernandez, Gayatri Spivak, and this sort of idea about eco-colonialism and epistemic violence. But I'm also really thinking about what Dr. Caitlin Reed talks about now and what we're sort of engaging with, which is this idea of green colonialism and climate colonialism, where the ongoing destruction or dispossession of lands and indigenous knowledges in an effort to build climate resiliency by repeating colonialism and maintaining colonialistic power through capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and destroy to replace, also called greenwashing, carceral conservation, or colonial conservation. Now, what I think is really important here for me is we're constantly asking people, like, why is it that you want to create a science or an intervention or a discussion that centers capitalism in any way? Like, you can't be a good scientist and be trying to use capitalism. You have to reject capitalism altogether. And I think it's been really important for me to come in and ask people to rethink what they think are the logics of settler colonialism. And this idea that we grow up with, that somehow we have an empty land, that we should eliminate the goal of settler colonialism is that you eliminate, you don't actually learn to live with people or learn to be in space as a good relative or guest, that you destroy to replace, that there's heteropatriarchy as normal or naturalized, that manifest destiny is a thing. And if you guys ever think about it, if an alien came down tomorrow and was like, what's manifest destiny? And then you were like, God-given right to land, I think he'd be like, who talked to God? Where's that email? And he'd be like, I don't know, I just started learning about it in the 3rd grade. And then he'd be like, why? And I was just like, why? Why would they teach 3rd graders about manifest destiny? That's really weird. Because they have to make it logical to people. Also, the dehumanization of the native. We are dehumanized in so many ways through so many things, including what people understand about our science and what people understand about our knowledge. Now, if you haven't seen this book, Fresh Banana Leaves, I highly recommend it. With Dr. Jessica Hernandez talking about sort of an indigenous landscape through indigenous science. And what I think is really important, sort of really says up front, conservation is a Western construct that was created as a result of settlers overexploiting indigenous lands, natural resources, and depleting entire ecosystems. It is not sort of designed to save the world. It is designed to save capitalism and colonialism. Right? So I want people to think about that as we think about what becomes our approach to research, what becomes our approach to the future. Is are we able to truly try to find a way to reject capitalism, to reject colonialism? And I've been calling it lately as I write about it for the book. I was like, we must refuse it, as Audrey Simpson says. You must refuse capitalism and colonialism, but I think of it twice now. It's refuse and refuse. It's to refuse and then trash. We're not saving it. We're not going to make it a better version of itself. This is what we have to do. And so I write a lot about the way that we are now able to reclaim our knowledges unapologetically. And one of the things that I said is, this is one thing I wrote for it. I said, my brain needs a break sometimes from explaining the fallacy of settler science to itself. The dichotomy of what science has wrought versus what science seems to fancy itself as doing. This is why I lean into the terminology of settler science, grown from and out of the same era of conquest, discovery, and global colonialism when settler science was used to illuminate the differences and to justify the ongoing occupation and dispossession of lands. So a science of today must ask how settler science can be dismantled, refused, and refused, or trashed. Because here we are trying to explain to settler science the very basic notions of indigenous epistemologies, of a place-based integrative science as a science of a people and place, and a science that believes in futures. To recognize that, guess what? If you're just trying to get yourself out of settler colonialism, then guess what? Your solutions have to reject settler colonialism. This is the box boxing you in. And it's tiring on a level I can't quite explain as an Indigenous woman, at least not now, while the world is also tiring. Will my story maybe make you stop for just a minute and think? I truly hope so. So I'm really thinking about, because okay, so everybody's like, you always have to have like your questions, right? Like your research questions. So, do I have research questions? Maybe. What I say to people is, there is a beautiful, decolonized, feminist, joyful, healing, vibrant society to be rebuilt from our radical imaginations and radical imaginings of a world without colonialism, patriarchy, and racism, where we can all drink the water, breathe the air, have a house, and feel good about what we live as a community. By centering Indigenous peoples, the land itself, and our more than human relatives, we must make the crazy thing possible, so that the dreamers and the planners and the organizers are working together. What if we just didn't do capitalism? What if there were no prisons? What if we just gave all the land back? What if we refused the settler colonial state? What if we wrote the things we needed to read? What if we shamed all of the billionaires? What if we sang together, danced together, and ate together, and laughed together? Because before settler colonialism, everybody had a house. Everybody had the food they needed to eat. Everybody could drink the water and breathe the air. And this is where I think Indigenous women are coming in and saying, if we're going to reimagine something, if we're going to revitalize and resurge, as you see happening in our tattoo traditions, our basketry traditions, our coming of age ceremonies, our fire traditions, we have to do that without embracing, and in fact, we have to reject patriarchy as a part of it. Because patriarchy is so ingrained in how we even look at the world. And so we are asking ourselves, like, what does it look like to radically reimagine when we are also pushing against patriarchy? Now, I want to give you another resource. This is a really great video that I think is great to watch if you'd like to. And this is actually the story of the Wiyot tribe making a decision that they were going to reject a wind farm that was going to be built on a sacred site in our region. It took the entire community to show up and testify as to why destroying a sacred site is not the answer to how we are going to solve climate change. And this is a beautiful story of the Wiyot peoples making a decision that even though they were being told that, like, oh no, these windmills are going to save the world, they had to start thinking about what's beyond what we need to do right now, and instead, how are we going to protect this world for generations upon generations upon generations? So I recommend it. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And what I also love about it is that our students showed up to that public hearing, and they made sure that people were there to know that they were on the side of the Wiyot peoples. Now, the other thing I like to point out, and I'm going to go through this very fast because I still want you to be able to watch the video about what we're doing about it now, is that a lot of the work that I do, especially around land back, ask people to rethink how they understand land in general. And so I just want to make clear that we have nationally, tribes have about 56 million acres of land that are held in trust with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the 574 federally recognized Indian tribes in the United States. But there are some tribes that do not have any trust lands. Contrast this with land trusts that continue to proliferate and in some areas of the nation own more land than tribes. Per the Land Trust 2005 National Land Trust Census Report, there were 1,667 land trusts in the United States, a 32% increase from 2000. The report calculated the total acreage conserved by local, state, and national land trusts at 37 million acres. Why is that not with Indigenous peoples? The percentage of peoples in California, so if you look at the California tribes, there are approximately 511,000 acres of land in trust for more than 100 federally recognized California Indian tribes, some of whom currently have no trust land, and some tribal land bases being less than 1 acre of land. This is to contrast what is truly happening. So as conservation and people that are going to like solve these climate issues come in, they start to go like, see, we're doing it well. My thing is like, you're not doing it at all if you're not centering Indigenous peoples in that. Now what's really interesting is sometimes I'll go do land back talks, and then afterwards people will come up to me and they'll be like, so you like want all the land back? And I'm like, yeah. And then they go like, do you want my house? At one point I looked at this guy and I was like, yeah, I'll take your house. Sounds good. I was like, nah, dude, like let's think about it. Because if you look at like who owns land in the United States, what you come to find out is, especially on the West Coast, land is primarily owned by the federal government, also the state and county government. So a lot of the land is held up in like government systems. So think about that as one thing. Now, if you also look then deeply into like who owns land, you come to find out that there's like these major families that own major amounts of land in California, Oregon, and Washington. So combined, these two families own more than 8 times the land of all California Indian tribes. So I say to them, maybe I'm not talking about your house, maybe I'm talking about 2 dudes. And is that hard? I mean, would that be hard if everybody got together and was like, hey, 2 dudes, do something, right? So I want people to rethink what this actually means. If we think about decolonization as not a metaphor, that land back is the thing that is going to result in the next world being built, then for me, that means that land back has to be at the center of the work that we're doing, even if we feel like it's not connected to the work that we're doing. We are ultimately working for land back, or what are we working for? This is where we talk about how, and this is what comes into the Food Sovereignty Lab, we talk about how we really want to think about building a future forward conservation and land management Indigenous ecofeminist ethic that really looks at trauma-informed land management, historical reframing of time, and then moving from resources to relatives. A lot of the times I'll go do restoration work with people where they're sort of like looking at a plan to do land restoration, and the question that a lot of like Western approaches ask is, what time are we trying to restore this land to? Are you shooting for 1700 or shooting for year 1? Like, what are you looking for? And I always say, you're asking the wrong question. It's not when are we restoring it to, because Indigenous peoples are future forward thinking. They never thought like, oh, we got to make sure we're always staying at one period of time. They're like, no, we're always thinking forward, so what makes sense for the land, the place, the peoples? I said the question shouldn't be, what time are we restoring it to? The question should be, who are we restoring it for? And then think about how that changes what you're looking at and how you're going to put something together. Another resource for you. They made a really great video about Indigenous land stewardship in California, and really talks about like why this is such an important ethic that you're starting to think about, and what does trauma-informed land management look like, because the land itself is the history. Like, the history is written on the landscape. The land knows the history intimately. It is time for us to understand the land is traumatized. The more than human relatives are traumatized. One thing that I wrote down was, you are not observing wildlife in a wild habitat. You are observing more than human relatives who have resisted, challenged, survived colonialism and genocide. You are attempting a rebuilding of a relationship severed by genocidal massacres, removal, displacement, and silence. I often think about how in the before time, where storytelling is cyclical, the animals know us as relative and speak our languages, which we grew together, and then one day we just stopped talking to them. How lonely that must be to live in that world. So when the wildlife students come to me, I'm like, when you're watching wildlife, they're watching you. When you're observing what's going on, they're observing you. You are building a relationship there. You are not just sort of saying this is how they act in the wild. They know you're there. They know exactly what's going on. And they have to be very cautious because they lived through a genocide. A genocide of people, a genocide of them. And they have to think about what that means. So that's what brought us here. One thing that we did at Humboldt was I worked with students to build what became the Rote Dalagore Food Sovereignty Lab and Traditional Ecological Knowledges Institute. It is a space that we designed to be able to bring in workers, knowledge holders, community members, and people that wanted to do research specifically where it comes to traditional ecological knowledge and Indigenous science. We built it over the last 5 years. This is what it looks like today. That's what it started as. And I'm going to play you a video that tells you the entire story of like where it came from. And that's how I'm going to end, and then we'll have time for conversation and questions. But I will tell you, this is on YouTube. And if you look up the Food Sovereignty Lab, everything is on our website, everything you can download, all the reports, all the things. I highly recommend you look it up. I will also say we've been invited multiple places to talk about the lab specifically. I'd be happy to talk about it more. Our reports are always online. Our last report came out, it's over 258 pages. We try to be very transparent with everything that we do, our results, like our outcomes, and we are not funded by the university, which we will talk a little bit about in the video. All I have to do is click a button. Let's see if that works.
Everybody's connection to food is different. We've all been raised by different families who have different cultures and backgrounds, and building relationships around those practices is fundamental. To invigorate the connection with food, to give people space and the ability to reconnect and understand where their food actually comes from is the most empowering thing you could do for a human being.
Food sovereignty is a term that can be explained in so many different ways. True sovereignty, I think, is our land back, and our medicines back, and all of our foods back, and our health back, and our mental health back. And all of that stems from being in balance and connected with the land.
So food sovereignty is fundamentally connected to the restoration of contaminated landscapes, but also the return of native landscapes into indigenous ownership and indigenous stewardship.
We need to think holistically about our foods, like we would think holistically about what our sovereignty is. And we need to think about not just the interconnection between sort of environmental justice in our foods, but also cultural, spiritual justice in our foods, criminal justice in our foods, and the ways in which we know at the heart of who we are that we should know our food.
We're a college that really is proud of our natural resource sciences, and you'll find multiple labs around campus to study kind of Western approaches to environmental sciences. That space is really lacking for indigenous knowledges.
I'd say the Food Sovereignty Lab started in Native American Studies 331, which is Indigenous Natural Resource Management Practices. It's a course that brings people together to kind of think about natural resources from an indigenous perspective. A lot of the times the students are learning for the first time about colonization and settler colonialism, and they're finding out that they really did go after our food. And they get focused on the part where they're sort of saying to themselves, well, what can we do about it? I think the biggest thing I've learned from students is they want their campus to be something meaningful and powerful, so they don't feel like they're just here to get an education and get out. They're like, we want to do something. We want to leave something behind. We want to build something.
It's always interesting because this university really boasts its Native American Studies department while kind of taking it away at the same time. And there's even things here that are misrepresenting Native culture, which has nothing to do with this region.
We kind of all put our heads together and just like threw ideas out about some of the things that we felt would re-indigenize the community.
We collectively decided that we didn't feel that we had the authority on that, so we decided to actually start doing interviews of faculty, staff, associated people with the university, and local tribes with what they wanted to see in the university to properly represent Indigenous students and the Indigenous communities.
We took all of those ideas that we'd had and what people had responded with, and then we came up with food sovereignty as being a really important central need, and it's something that we could implement here.
A significant part of that feedback was that an outdoor space and landscape was really important for community, for hands-on learning, resurgence and reconnection to traditional foodways and indigenous sciences and knowledges.
And we collectively then came up as a class to do a lab space here because we saw that as a way to incorporate the desire for a native plants garden, the desire for a space for cultural activities, for medicine making, regalia making, and also for further research into things relating to Indigenous resource management and stuff like that.
The Food Sovereignty Lab is not the first instance of indigenizing this campus. There have been movements since the university was founded of Indigenous peoples carving space out for themselves.
Originally, this space behind us here was designated to be for the Native American Studies Department. It was actually supposed to be something like a lab for cultural activities. For whatever reason, the space was taken away and then it was turned into a commercial space for overpriced drinks and junk food. Ultimately, that space wasn't successful here and the university decided to close it down.
We were like, well, there's this space. It's literally attached to the Native American Forum. It's right across from the building that houses the Native American Studies Department. It's right next to CPAT, which is all about food production. We should have a food sovereignty lab here.
The students put in applications to acquire a space, and it was rejected because traditional ecological knowledge was not considered something that was applicable or useful for the entire student body. But I think what students who designed and proposed this project really want to get the campus community to understand is that Indigenous knowledge actually needs to be incorporated into all of our environmental sciences and can't be treated or siloed off to the side as something that's marginally interesting, but actually we need to reconfigure the way we think about landscape in this place in ways that center Indigenous experiences and Indigenous knowledges of this place.
During finals, during the last couple of weeks of semester, we banded together. We went out and got over 100 letters of support, submitted them to the University Senate, and appealed this.
5 students, a representative of the Wiyot tribe, and Dr. Risling Baldy testified in front of the HSU Senate saying what a misuse of the campus's facilities it was to deny us, especially based on racial bias, that an Indigenous space couldn't be a space for everyone. There was a lot of bickering and administrative stuff. Finally got conditionally approved on the understanding that we would fund the lab entirely ourselves.
We're very, very grateful to be here today with you all. I'm Dr. Cutcha Baldy. The Food Sovereignty Lab, which is actually going to be right here in this building, as you might be able to see from all the signage. This was a project that was put together by students. This was a vision of theirs, and now should be open in fall. We were told we had to raise $250,000 if we wanted this to happen. They expected it to take anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and we did it in less than a year because of individual donors who stepped forward. So this is a community project. In Hupawise Dia Mpongwa Aula, that means I'm happy for all the things we're going to do together. Thank you, everyone.
Before this space has already been built, before it's been renovated, it's already furthering students, has programs. We're already giving back to our community and to our tribal members and partners.
I mean, you guys are living it right now. We're at an Indigenous Foods Festival that came out of nowhere, and just because we were like, we should do cool stuff, you can really tell that what this means for the university is huge. There's no other university that has a food sovereignty lab at all, and we're now becoming a traditional ecological knowledges institute.
The interior of the Food Sovereignty Lab will include a commercial kitchen, plant drying racks, plant processing spaces, seed bank, community seating, computer stations, work tables, and in the exterior of the lab, we are envisioning this space actively with community feedback. The feedback we've received indicates that this space should include acorn processing, regalia making, community gathering area. This will also include a salmon cooking pit, which is currently established. This will also include a native plant landscape and signage that will introduce visitors to this place and how they can come and visit in a good way, a way that is respectful to the fact that this is Wiyot land.
We gather here today on unceded Wiyot lands, lands that were taken in the Wiyot peoples without consent, without compensation, and without just compensation to their tribal governance. And so we acknowledge that today.
Since Cal Poly Humboldt was established in this place, Wiyot peoples have not had access to this place. And these plants and these more than human relatives have not been sung to or cared for in a really long time. So now we're in a phase of reconnection.
The reconnection of our traditional foods has been happening for a really long time. But when I think about Indigenous food sovereignty, I'm thinking about liberating our rivers, liberating our fish, returning fire to the landscape. Food sovereignty, I think, is so important in this particular moment, and I think this center, this institute really embodies the nature of that work. This is such a joyous moment, and I'm so happy to welcome you all to the Breed Alligator Food Sovereignty Lab and Traditional Ecological Knowledge Institute.
We fought so hard to keep our acorns and to protect our salmon. And I think decolonization happens quickly. I think it actually moves quickly because it just sort of makes more sense. I don't think that you can change the world thinking in a singular way. I think you need to be able to pull from multiple ways of thinking. I hope that the lab will come in and help students see that their vision of what they want to do needs to also be informed by Indigenous peoples. And that knowledge comes from a very honest and open and forthright place about not just what we have always known about the places that we live, but what we have continued to do to manage the places that we live, even if those things are not highlighted, centered, or acknowledged in contemporary curriculum or educational experiences. What can the world look like if we all, instead of centering capital and economy, become people that really think about the long-term impacts of what we're doing here and then how we live in a way that everyone can drink the water and everyone can breathe the air and everyone can eat the food, right? Those things we can fix. We can actually do something about it. You can find it on YouTube, so you can watch it over and over again. Just to let you know a couple of other things you can find if you're like, well, what do you guys do? You can read our Food Futures magazine, which we published 2 issues of so far, all about the research, the outcomes, the things that our graduate students and communities are doing. We also will be doing a call for publication in the Food Futures magazine coming out next month, so I hope everybody will want to publish and we give it away for free, and then it's an open access publication. Both of these covers were designed by Native Youth as part of our Native Youth Council, so I'm really proud of them too. And then we also have our publications up online, including our Youth Council reports, and we just came out with this, which is our 3-part series. We asked our youth council what's going to save the world, and after everything they learned over the Food for Indigenous Futures project, all the work they did in the community, all the things, they came together and they said, here's what's going to save the world: acorn, salmon, and seaweed. So they had us make 3 movies about it, so you can also find those online. Again, you can also find our reports online. You can find me online. They're making me be on TikTok, the Food Sovereignty Lab, so you can also find me on TikTok. But we're here for a conversation next. Thank you, everybody.
So thank you so much. I have a million thoughts and questions and admiration for all you've done. And one, I guess, to kick us off, maybe in thinking about an Indigenous ecofeminist ethic, I'd love to hear more about the kinds of rethinking of what strength is and what flourishing is that calls for. And I'm thinking about, you're talking about settler colonialism and the duct tape and, the precarity of settler colonialism, and that analysis alongside an Indigenous feminism's such a strong analysis of how, stereotypical strength and masculinity stuff is so precarious too and so fragile, or how in thinking about the environment, the kind of concrete and control model is so fragile, actually, and how kind of all of these parts, the feminist, the Indigenous, the eco, there's a kind of rethinking in your work of what's strong, what's flourishing, that really speaks so broadly. So I'd just love to hear more about that.
I think it teaches us to remind ourselves how deeply Indigenous peoples were engaging in theory and philosophy alongside practical applications of things like resource management or engagement of how you do conservation, like what we would call these terminologies like resource management, conservation, science, right? They were doing all of those things, but they were also deeply philosophical. They were engaging in a building of philosophy that sort of understood, one, that we must decenter like I would say, we must decenter bipedal Homo sapiens as the center of thought, theory, ideology, like that we're the only ones that are sort of sitting around gossiping. I guarantee, I just was outside on the phone with my mom, and then a squirrel came walking up, and I was like, oh, hey, what's up? And she was like, who are you talking to? The squirrel comes up, and she's like, oh, what does he want? And I said, what do you want? And then he just was like, he shrugged, and like they are deeply gossiping about us quite consistently. But they're also some of the most patient people on the planet. And that patience, I think, comes from their understanding of a world that is beyond time. And how hard it is when we come in as California Native people, even Native people in general, and they're like, how long have you been here? And we're like, for all time. Like since the beginning of time. For time immemorial. And how hard that is for people to like grasp onto. And they go like, what is that? What do you mean? I think our more than human relatives rethink all of those things. They go like, yeah, like all time, like before time, like all of the times. Because they understand the world in like millions of years. We understand the world in like thousands of years. So we're tiny, teeny, tiny little baby things trying to figure out like how we put words into motion. And I think they also humble us to our thought process of things like we are so smart and we are so strong. I always tell people like, you know, a bear looks at you and is like, that poor thing. Like, it's so weak and like hairless. And like, it's always cold, but then sometimes it's too hot. And like, it can't even like pick something up and throw it. And like, if a bear hit you, you would be like, you'd get knocked over. But if you went and hit a bear, it'd be like, sorry. Like, so even the idea of like, what is strength? Like, we are not as strong as we think. We think we can like conquer. And I think to a bear, we're just these tiny little things that need help and guidance. And I think the salmon were the same way. They kind of were like, oh, these poor things. Like they can't even swim for like a really long time. They get confused about where they belong. Like we gotta help them. And so asks us to rethink the sort of hubris of bipedal Homo sapiens as the center of everything, of thought, of theory, of engagement. Even I've started to really think about like, how do we recenter our even understanding of this idea of us as like the peoples of this planet? Because if a person from outside this planet, if an alien person from outside this planet looked at it, you know, they would be like, that's a water planet. It's mostly water. And they'd be like, that's the water planet. And then they'd go and they'd be like hanging out in the water because that's where like all the stuff is happening. And we're all like up here like tiny little ants building a bunch of ant hills, being like, look how important we are. And then they're like, but most of your planet is water. So I think just even rethinking what we kind of understand about how the world functions and works, and it is something that Indigenous peoples really understood, because so many of the creation stories that people tell me and that I learned from are a bunch of like our first people being like, so you guys are gonna be the problem. And what we're going to try to do is help you learn how to live here and not be the problem. And then when you become the problem, we're going to really hope that your more than human relatives will step in and help you be less of a problem. And I think that that's a really important way that they wanted to help human people to just like go like, oh, remember, we're kind of the problem. We need to like see how we can become part of it, like part of the solution. And what I love is that our more than human relatives were always like, look, you are very important and needed. You are part of this ecosystem. We need you. We set it up to need you so that you can understand how to be here. There's so many stories that start with like a more than human relative, like coyote or salmon or somebody being like, ooh, I'm gonna teach you how to be here so that you can do the things you need to do so the whole planet will be good. And it can't be good without you, but that means you have to think of something bigger than yourself, something outside of yourself. And I think that that's what we're reconnecting to all the time, is that they're always trying. I said, at one point we were at a meeting and we were talking about dam removal, And we had a scientist that he was like, you know, the salmon haven't gone like above where the dams are for like over 100 years. And I said, yeah? And he goes, do you think they're gonna know that they can like once we take the dams down, are they gonna know that they can go above like where the dams were? And I was like, I mean, they've been going there for like millions of years. I think they're gonna know how to go home. Like, I think it's like we have to decenter this idea that like we control everything. And I think what's really beautiful about what I learned up in our area is we've learned a humbleness to our region, to our peoples, to our more than human relatives. We've also learned a lot of humor in that. And I think we center humor in so much of what we do because we've learned that that's the humor that will remind us to be humble to the world around us. I always tell people, like, it will humble you otherwise. I feel like we're always getting humbled to the world around us.
Thank you. I mean, I'm hearing some of the words that keep popping out are humility, humor, tending showed up in a number of places, the kind of interdependencies and obligations that you're writing and talking about. Two very different questions, so pick one maybe because then we'll open it up to everyone. One is that AI part of the book. Would love to hear about it. And then the other is, you know, I just love the Food Sovereignty Lab story, and I also love the dam removal story. And I'm wondering, especially for people who aren't from California or maybe, you know, haven't heard, what are some of the lessons that you would really take? You mentioned one just now, the salmon know where they're going. But what are some of the lessons about this kind of victory that, you know, y'all achieved with the removal of the dams on the Klamath River? So one or both of those. AI or dams?
I'll skip AI unless somebody asks about it. You know, I really want to know about AI. We'll skip it for now because I don't even know if that thing's going to stick around for very long. But I will say this. So when I talk about dam removal, I talk about it in the context of how we understand decolonization. I say a couple of things usually. First is that I do think that decolonization happens much more quickly and actually really becomes more like it actually is an easier thing to do than to continue to try to navigate like how we're going to make colonialism a little bit better each time. Just decolonizing is way easier. It's like way easier because it actually makes sense. And you see that with the dams because when we first came to the table, like when people first came to the table and they're like, hey, you should remove the dams, they were told that was impossible. They're like, what are you talking about? What does it mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? And then they're like, I don't know, just like put them up. Take them down. And then they were like, no, like what do you mean? And they were like, that's impossible. And they also kept saying like, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. But I always say it's like, Indigenous peoples are funny because then when they came back to the table and they're like, okay, look, we're back again, take the dams down. And they were like, look, if we take the dams down, because there's like all this stuff behind the dams, when it comes back down, it's going to destroy the environment. And the environment will be destroyed for like 150 years while all the stuff is going back into the ocean that we trapped back there because they didn't think long term about building dams. And so they were like, so that'll be really hard, you guys, like 150 years of restoration that has to happen. And literally you have these elders going, yeah, I get it. So like we should do that right now. So like we only have 149 years, 364 days to go. Like, what do you mean? And so the long-term thinking of like, maybe the work that we're doing now is not going to make a difference in our lifetime. Why does that make it something not worth investing in? If Indigenous peoples navigating colonialism had said, this is not going to stop this in my lifetime, but didn't write that letter or make that thing or push back on that policy or say no, fast forward, we are the 150 years later people. We use all of those things to build what our futures are going to look like. They may have written it thinking like, oh, it doesn't make a difference. Guess what? It's making a difference. We revitalized our women's coming of age ceremonies because of the stories that women shared that were in the archives. We revitalized the work that we do because of the things that people made sure that they left behind. They sometimes would say, I can't remember everything, but I can remember this song. I can remember this story. And they made sure that that got carried forward. That was just as important as anything, whether or not they saw that change in their lifetime. I always tell my graduate students I work with, like, why are you so obsessed with whether or not this is going to stop the thing today? Maybe what you're doing is contributing to the thing that needs to happen, so 150 years from now, they have the thing they need to change the world. But I also know that the world changes very fast, because as they said, like, you take down the dam, it's going to take 150 years. What they've since found is actually the environment bounces back super quickly when you take dams down, so fast that they think maybe it takes like 20 years, but it's probably shorter than that before the environment completely bounces back to a point that it actually is thriving, because that's the way it's supposed to be. So that's decolonization. Decolonization is dam removal, and the world just makes more sense. And it actually becomes what it's supposed to be. So instead of having to put concrete over it, trying to control it, it is what it's supposed to be, and it just makes more sense for everybody. And they know that now because they started taking dams down in other parts of the world, and you're seeing that happen in our region. So I always tell people, because of that story, we are not allowed to say that anything is an impossible ask, task, or thing that we want to build anymore. Because the people who started this work 50, 60 years ago were told it was impossible. And I was there when they took the dams down. So impossible things are happening in our lifetime. We don't get to say anything's impossible. We don't get to come to the table and be like, that might not be possible. We were told it was all going to be impossible. We were told land back was going to be impossible. But we were told they would never get their sacred island back from the city of Eureka. I was there when they gave it back. They came back for 25 years to make that happen. And it happened because they just kept coming back being like, I mean, it didn't happen today, but it's gonna happen. So to remember for ourselves that, like, we are seeing these impossible things, so we cannot think that the end of capitalism, moving beyond settler colonialism, and the world without dams isn't possible. We know it's possible. We just have to start the process of telling the story about what it could be.
One thing that has seemed impossible is since the 1930s, the Shoshone tribes of Payahunadu or the Owens Valley have had unsettled water rights because the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power dispossessed them of those water rights in partnership with the federal government. And it has seemed impossible. We're approaching 100 years of unsettled water rights, but I should have brought the flyer with me. And so feel free to email me, I can send it to you. There is the possibility right now of a negotiating team being named by the federal government to actually work on negotiating those rights. No one expects that would happen tomorrow. No one expects that's going to happen anytime soon, but people are still fighting hard to get those negotiations underway. The city of Los Angeles has not agreed to enter into those negotiations. So if you want to write a letter to your city council people, Department of Water and Power commissioners, and the mayor, there is template language. It may be posted on the website of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, but if you don't find it there, drop me a line and I can send you the flyer, because it's right now that they need people living in Los Angeles to put pressure on the city to enter into those negotiations, which people are saying are impossible. So let's take some lessons from the dam and the salmon. Thank you so much. Let's open it up. I'll let the microphone people.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oops,
Should I stand?
I don't think it's on.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you for being here. This was amazing. Something from the food sovereignty video that sparked a lot of curiosity for me was there's a line about not just seeking cultural or spiritual justice through food, but also criminal justice. I would love to hear more about what that means and what that looks like in this educational setting through the Food Sovereignty Lab. I think there was also a shot of like the doors of the lab that had, it looked like missing posters on the doors, and it led to a lot of questions for me around like the role of food in pedagogy and thinking about violence and loss as it goes beyond foodways. And you know, it seems like these direct experiences in people's lives and communities, and I'm wondering like where you see the work of food sovereignty within like contending with that loss and violence?
I mean, I do think food sovereignty asks us to reconsider who is criminalized and how they are criminalized under colonialism, because there was a period of time where you could be put in jail for gathering acorns. There was periods of time where you could be put in jail for doing gathering practices of like traditional medicines. There are still cases that happen. There's actually a case that happened like over 20 years ago now, where an indigenous medicine person was treating someone with ayahuasca, and that so happened that their patient died, and they were criminalized and told that they were going to be put in jail for it. And then people are like, contrast that with the number of medical deaths that happen from doctors every year, and this sort of like ways in which people are navigating hospitals where they get, you know, like infections and die, and yet one indigenous person is still practicing, and then they are criminalized and put in jail. So I think it asks us to rethink then anybody who is criminalized under colonialism, what happens to like who becomes criminal? Just like who becomes fugitive, or who becomes like somebody that you can sort of like target for like watching, right? All under the eye of like colonialism. We always talk about with our young people especially, like this is why we ask you to rethink what it means for when you're like, well, that's like a bad person, and that's why they're put into prison or whatever. And you're like, you know who was put into prison? And so let's talk about who's in prisons now. And then let's talk about how we are seeing ways in which prisons are being used primarily as like free or very cheap labor systems for food systems and like to make sure to maintain the economy of like the state and the government, and how that is all tied to like sort of our expectations of like a food system and how it operates, especially in California, where you have the ways in which we do any type of like food growing, like all of that is centered as like the most necessary thing. Like there's a lot of, if you're driving through the Central Valley, you'll notice that they have all these signs that say, California feeds the world. And this is why we have to do this. We have to like constantly center this overuse of our water, of our natural resources, why we don't eat by season, like we feed the world. And that you can also be, so you can be put into a system that asks you to labor to that and then degrades you as making you a criminal under that system. For things that, I mean, but like for things that we would have said with indigenous peoples should be really about like restorative justice, and not about sort of what happens to like criminalize a person and then put them into like a jail. Prior to colonialism, there was no jails. There was no jails. That's all. Like to think about like we can live in a world with no jails. Like that doesn't have to exist. So how do we do that? I also think when you did see, so one of the reasons why that happens is we have so many people in our communities that connect, especially because we're doing our long-term research project on the connection between food justice, food sovereignty, and mental health and substance abuse disorders. And what you start to see is the youth are talking about how the work they're doing in cultural practice, especially around foods, is helping them to rethink like their own place in community. And we actually have one of our youth council members that wrote for our magazine, and what he specifically said was, this program is keeping me sober. Like this is why. Like, and we think of that as such interconnected to the spaces of like what happens in our communities when people are up against some of the sort of big major issues like missing peoples. One of the posters you would see in the video, but if you came to the lab, is actually of my cousin, who is currently missing. She's been missing for almost 5 years. In October will be 5 years. She went missing as a result of a major mental health issue that was happening in her life, and we watched as it spiraled, but also as the criminal justice system would do nothing to assist us with her or anything that was going on in her lives, and what it resulted in was her going missing. We do not have any answers as to what happened to her. We are still actively investigating and trying to find a way forward as a family. And I will tell you, like, we noticed the sort of interconnection between that and her next generation, because she is the mother of 2 children. And one of those children actually was with me, is my nephew. And he's here, actually, he's down here right now, he sent me pictures. He's at a basketball tournament. So I think we see a very deep interconnection between what we can do on our landscapes to be able to protect our people from the fact that, like, even a criminal justice system has no justice. There was no justice there. And we try to call attention to that as much as possible.
Hi, my name is Grace. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a second-generation Cantonese American. My question is mostly about systems and personal takes. When you talk about systems, about settler colonialism and the patriarchy and whatnot, it's usually, I'm not saying all of it, is enacted by white people. And so my question is, how do you deal with that trauma of how much you and your people have been hurt and lived in modern society where white people are dominantly the culture in America?
I think for me, there's me personally, there's sort of what I see in my communities. How part of this process of decolonization has to truly be about how we decenter white supremacy and whiteness as sort of the main idea of how the world actually functions, or even who the subject of the world is. We are constantly sort of taught as if, and primarily it becomes sort of white male property owner who is who in no way has who is in no way disabled or in is perfectly functional to the system is what all of our goals should be. As if that's the way we should all grow up to be. And so then everything that happens is taught, again, under settler colonialism, under the structures, is trying to teach us that anything outside of that is somehow foreign or odd, or that we should reject it, or that what we're trying to gain is an understanding of how we get closer to this kind of perfect subject. And I think about this a lot in the work I do, through psychology and statistics, where I constantly tell people, in this world that we exist in, where we're doing research, my peoples are always talked about as being statistically insignificant. Everywhere I go, they're like, you are statistically insignificant. If I look at something on the TV, it's every other, and then statistically insignificant is where American Indian, Native American falls. I said, that's hard. That's hard to be an Indigenous person in your homelands, and you are told you are statistically insignificant to that place. Then on top of that, so we get taught that, but where we become statistically significant are in things like sexual assault rates, suicide rates, missing and murdered peoples. And suddenly where we see ourselves as statistically significant is in all of these really horrific things, so we only get to see ourselves represented in these ways that sort of try to embody this idea that somehow we are outside of this norm of how the world is supposed to live. This is not how Indigenous people see the world. And what I remind our young people as they come in and they're like, well, we're going to do this work, is I was like, cool, you're the ones that are going to tell this story. Because we are significant. Our stories are significant. What we have to say is significant. So we have to write it, we have to publish it, we have to put it, we have to be the people that tell the story. And sometimes they tell me well, I don't want to publish it. I want to talk about it. I want to make an art piece about it. Or I want to make a comic book about it. Or I want to make a painting. I was like, that's just as important as any of the things that we're doing to make articles that sort of come out. I'll say it's not easy to live in a settler colonial world where, I'll tell you all the time, I say, Indigenous women are exhausted. People are exhausted. Actually I wrote this down for my chapter on settler sense and sensibility. I said, exhaustion and overwhelm is a tool of settler colonialism. Mm-hmm. It is to exhaust you. Because how can you take it apart if you are exhausted? So everything, then I was like, that's why they have so much paperwork. To exhaust you, to make it hard. Food and community support, they won't even feed you. They won't even pay your rent. Their help is conditional on the non-profitization, their return on investment in communities, the level of impact. Again, so much paperwork. The landlords who have all of the resources for making change, there's no generosity, there's only incentives or what's in it for me, or how odd would it be for Indigenous peoples to come to this place and look around and be like, why do you guys have houseless people? What's wrong with you? They would not think of it as and we would be like, oh, well, there's a lot of paperwork. It's hard. And they'd be like, you guys have a bunch of houses, give them one of those. What is this logic that we internalize? And then they would be like, why can't we just give it to them? And we would be like, oh, well, it's a lot of paperwork. And they would say, ooh, I said, why can people always find money to build warehouses, but not spaces of art or joy or justice? Like, why do we internalize this? And then I say, it's really funny to me that if we pulled somebody out of year one and brought them here, they would be like, I mean, I guess nice buildings, but like, why do you have people on the street? Give them a place to live. It's so logical. And then they would look at all of us and they would say, I mean, it's kind of primitive. So we have to like functionally always be in this world that sort of would tell us that that kind of imagination is not powerful. But I think where we create generative spaces where we can come in and say the things and walk away feeling good about those things and tell a story that's a little bit different, to me, creating spaces that don't center settler colonialism and white supremacy, I kept telling people, it took me a long time in my career to stop coming into spaces and trying to convince people to get on the decolonization train. Because I was like, one, we've been on it for like 20 years. Two, it's real fun. Three, it's way better. So like, I'm done trying to get you to get on the train. I'm on the train. You're not on it? Enjoy. Come on it when you're ready. I'm gonna talk to the people that are on the train. We're ready to build something. We're ready to make something. We gotta stop talking to the people who are trying to tell us it's not possible or like trying to convince them. We gotta stop. I said, I'm done. I wanna be over here having the really cool conversations. I promise you it's much better. I promise you we're doing cooler stuff. I promise you it's the thing that's actually gonna make a difference. I will tell you this, we revitalized our women's coming of age ceremony like 20 years ago. When we were first starting it, people were like, that's gonna be really hard. And we said, I know. And with the first girl, we asked her to do it. She was like, I don't know if I can. Very scared. She'd never seen it before. And then she did it. Then the next girl did it. Then the next girl did it. And you fast forward 10 years, we had our first girl that asked to do it. Instead of us being like, you have to do it, she asked to do it. And then you fast forward 20 years, and my daughter was doing her dance. And she had never grown up in a world without a coming of age ceremony. In her mind, this is all we ever did. And I kept telling people, I grew up in a world without it. I lived in the world without it. I lived in the world before it was back. I know it, I can tell you about it, and at the time it felt like that was gonna be forever. And now we have it back, and she cannot imagine a world without it. And I tell people, that's how quickly you can change the world. The world has changed forever because we did it. My medicine woman, I asked her, I was like, so what do I tell people? Because sometimes they're like, how do you do it? She goes, I don't know. You just ask for it. And then when they give it to you, you do it. Anything you want, you ask for. And then when they give it to you, you do it. And everything you guys are doing is a part of that process. Sometimes it feels too big. Sometimes it feels like, is this enough? I guarantee you, if there was an Indigenous person who wrote a letter to the fort where they were like, hey, somebody stole my daughter and I want her back. Here's her name and this is what I'm telling you. And they wrote that letter and sent it in, and then they were like, nothing ever happened. That is the letter that we use now to talk about why we have to build something better for our Indigenous women. That letter meant the world to me. Like, that's how important everything you can do is, even if it doesn't make a change in this lifetime. We decenter the people who don't want to have the conversation. We center the people who are ready, who want to tell that story. Because that story is ready to be built again.
Thank you. We need to move toward concluding the conference, but first let's all give such an appreciation to Dr.